got an email from a friend recently who sent me this message. We have nice statutes in this state, but we have no resources, not enough staff, not enough administrators with backbone, and lots of legislators leaning on the administrators to go soft. May sound familiar from what we've heard the last couple of days. That came from my friend Skip, who lives in Norfolk, Virginia. And he was talking about the Chesapeake Bay. So it's not necessarily comforting, but we're not the only people that have water issues. I am going to talk about the bill Senator Simmons referred to, Senate Bill 552, and I represented the Florida Springs Council earlier this year, and I guess it was late last year, talking about this bill. And I think we're the first, maybe only, environmental group that came out in opposition to the bill from the get-go. And it wasn't that it was a terrible bill. It doesn't make things worse. It has some very good things in it. But I tried to, and FSC tried to filter it through one criterion, which is this bill going to result in the restoration of Florida Springs? And we looked at that very closely. In fact, there was a bill, Senator Simmons referred to it a couple of years earlier, that he had a large part in drafting. I think it may have been 1576 or some 4-digit number. And when we testified on the bill earlier this year, we said, if that earlier bill that Senator Simmons had helped draft a couple of years ago was before us today, we would be endorsing it. We can't endorse this bill. Well, what suffered in the end? A lot of good provisions were removed. As I said, a bunch of good provisions remain. But fundamentally, the water bill, SB 552, relies on the same old tools that have been around, referenced earlier, in some cases since 1972, and have proven to be pretty ineffective. We heard yesterday that the state representatives were asked to talk about success stories, and they brought up a couple. Casey mentioned Volusia Blue and restoration of the flow there. And there is a lot of money targeted to that, and I hope it happens. Hope and pray it happens. We saw data yesterday afternoon that it hasn't happened yet. You know, we're 7 or 8 years into that process. We really haven't made any headway in terms of flow in that spring. We also heard the success story at Ocala, where it's indubitably true that the nitrate levels have fallen significantly. But again, that's a mixed bag. It's fallen in large measure because the water's been diluted by the fact Ocala is pirating water from other sources. So it's good the nitrates are down, but the biological productivity isn't, the clarity isn't, and so forth. So these success stories are very mixed. They're success stories due to MFLs. Oh, I'm not going to pay attention in 2 minutes. Rob Williams yielded 2 minutes to me. Thank you, Rob, for that. I really appreciate it. Anyway, when we looked at the bill last year, we decided to be very helpful and offer some amendments, we being the Florida Springs Council. So we drafted, I guess it was 17 amendments to the bill. And some of them were sort of dismissed out of hand as being politically impossible, such as increased taxes on fertilizer. And we've heard very clearly in the last 2 days, we've got to reduce pumping, we've got to reduce fertilizer that goes in the ground. Economic tools are the most appropriate way to do that. They're not being used. So we ended up with 4 amendments that were offered on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. None of them passed. None of them actually got a recorded vote, which was very disappointing to me. I think when we hold legislators responsible, we need to get them to vote on serious issues so we can judge their record. And that just doesn't happen in Florida. I worked in the U.S. Congress for 27 years, and I was on the Democratic side, but I admired the Republicans who were very good at getting votes on tough issues and putting people on the spot and having them defend their records. That doesn't happen in this state. So we talk about being effective with legislators, and working with them, and so forth. I think without tough votes on tough issues, that's very unlikely to happen. A couple other very quick things, and I'll shut up. Mention was made of $50 million in Springs funding. That's great. It's going to be $1 billion over 20 years, probably more than that, and that's good. But are we doing enough? Are we directing it to the right sources. I've been troubled by the fact that most of this money is going to the people that are causing the problems. And I realize that's where, that's where the nitrates are coming from, and that's where the water drawdowns are coming from. But I'm sort of offended by the fact that the polluters are essentially being funded by this program. And one other point on that, I talked to the person in Tallahassee that is really in charge of this $50 million, and I said, what do you do? What are your plans to oversee how these funds are being spent, to guarantee they're being spent appropriately? Because you're going to spend $1 billion. You don't want to be doing dumb things in year 1, 2, and 3 and repeat them in year 19 and 20. So what's your oversight program? And I was told, well, let me get back to you on that. And I got a call back 3 days later, and the answer was, we don't have a program to assess the effectiveness of these projects. That's crazy. That's mismanagement of government. One last thing I will say, which is, David mentioned the function of oversight. I mean, to me, legislators, in terms of their duties, writing the laws, passing the budgets, very important. Maybe a third of the job, half the job. I think half the job of a good legislator is oversight, investigation, really figuring out what's going on with these programs. I don't think Senator Simmons aside clearly knows what's going on. I don't think a lot of legislators realize that DMAPs aren't really working. We can go into that in more detail, but we need serious oversight. I would really hope, my fervent wish from this panel would be that Senator Simmons chairs the Senate Environment Committee next year. And does a series of hearings around the state on water issues, including the Springs issues. I don't think anybody that's there that could do a better job of that. And I think it's desperately needed. I think the legislators really need some ground truthing on what's going on, rather than just the agency bucketing mucks coming in and telling them everything's fine, because everything isn't fine. Thank you very much.